Imagine you're handed like this massive logistical puzzle.
Yeah.
Your job is to calculate the exact population of a sprawling, constantly moving metropolis.
Right.
But the catch is, the citizens of this city are completely invisible to you for, well, 99% of their lives.
Which is just a resource manager's worst nightmare, honestly.
Exactly. I mean, they're born hidden underground. And when they finally do emerge, they immediately travel thousands of miles into this vast, dark wilderness where you absolutely cannot follow.
You have no idea what they're doing out there.
Right. You don't know how they survive or what kills them. And the only time they ever become visible to you again is during this tiny fleeting window of just a few weeks, right before they die.
Oh, and just to add some pressure, the survival of entire ecosystems and millions of dollars in commerce depend entirely on you getting this count exactly right.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so thrilled to get into this one because our mission today is to follow the hidden, frankly miraculous life of a single fish.
The sockeye salmon.
Yes, the sockeye salmon. We're going to track this one animal from its birth in a dark gravel nest out into a world we can barely comprehend and back to its death in the exact same spot years later.
And we're doing this not just as like a fun nature walk.
No, definitely not, because understanding this single sockeye secret life is the master key to understanding how humanity attempts to manage a natural resource that is practically invisible. So what are we pulling from today?
So we have a really comprehensive dossier for you today. We're synthesizing foundational government science from NOAA Fisheries and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game.
Solid sources.
Yeah, and we're also pairing that with some cutting-edge, peer-reviewed navigation research from leading biologists. We really want to look closely at the mechanics of how this animal does what it does.
Stripping away the mystery to look at the actual cellular and ecological mechanisms. Because we're tracking a creature that lives in 3 distinct worlds that we humans can barely even see.
Right, under the gravel, in hidden lakes, and just lost in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean.
It's wild. Every piece of technology we use to monitor our rivers, I mean the towers, the sonar, the AI, it all exists because the biology of this fish has historically just completely outrun our ability to observe it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the sheer scale of the salmon's journey, we actually have to start at the very end.
Or rather, the exact spot to which it's eventually going to return to die.
Right.
We have to start with the red, year 0 of our sockeye's life.
So paint a picture for us. Where are we?
Okay, so we're in the summer in a freshwater drainage system, usually a stream that feeds into or out of a lake. A female sockeye salmon has returned to this exact spot, and she uses her body, specifically her tail, to aggressively excavate a nest into the gravel bed of the fast-flowing stream.
And that nest is the red.
Exactly. That's the red. And in this carved-out depression in the stones, she's going to deposit anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 eggs.
And if you've never seen this happen in real life or on film, I mean, it is violent work.
Oh, incredibly violent. The female turns on her side and just violently thrashes her tail against the rocks. She's displacing heavy gravel, using the hydrodynamics of the stream to lift the stones and create this perfect pocket.
It's an enormous expenditure of energy for an animal that is already dying.
Right, it's this massive biological investment.
Yeah, and those thousands of eggs are immediately fertilized by a male. And then she moves slightly upstream and repeats the digging process.
Which sweeps the gravel back over the eggs, right?
You got it. It allows the current to sweep the newly excavated gravel back down over the fertilized eggs, burying them under this protective layer of stone. And within just a few weeks of this happening, both of those parent fish will succumb to the degradation of their journey.
Their part in the story is entirely over.
Completely over. The parents are gone, and now there are thousands of fertilized eggs buried in the dark, cold rocks entirely on their own.
It is such a stark beginning to a life. The parents secure the eggs under the stones and just expire. And then we enter this long hidden winter.
From year 0 into year 1.
All right, these eggs are just locked down there in the dark.
And during that winter, underneath the gravel, those eggs actually hatch. But they don't emerge as swimming fish right away.
What do they look like?
They hatch into a life stage called alevins. An alevin is essentially a tiny, fragile fish larva, and it has this large, bulbous yolk sac attached directly to its abdomen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they stay hidden completely down there in the interstitial spaces of the gravel, protected from the current and from predators.
What are they actually doing down there? Are they just metabolizing?
Precisely. They are living entirely off the nutrients in that attached yolk sac. It's this dense package of lipids and proteins. The gravel acts as a fortress, but it's a fortress that requires a constant flow of highly oxygenated water.
So if something blocks that flow.
It's game over. If the gravel gets choked with fine silt, say from a landslide or logging runoff, the water stops flowing through those tiny gaps, the dissolved oxygen drops, and the alevins suffocate.
That's terrifying. So they're safe from predators, but they are entirely at the mercy of the water quality percolating through those stones for the entire winter.
Exactly.
I am always just struck by the isolation of this beginning. You were born in a subterranean bunker, pinned under stones, surviving on this biological backpack full of rations and freezing water, just waiting for the world to warm up.
But eventually the spring arrives, the water temperature shifts, and the rations run out.
And that temperature shift is the trigger.
Right. The yolk sac is finally absorbed, meaning they now require external food, so they swim up, navigating vertically out of that gravel matrix.
And they emerge into the water column as fry.
Yes, as fry. And for our sockeye, this emergence kicks off a very specific migration. They're swept by the current from that natal stream into a nursery lake.
And this is where the sockeye really differentiates itself from the rest of its genus, isn't it?
It really is. What's fascinating here is that among all the Pacific salmon, the sockeye is the true lake specialist.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you look at a different species, like a pink salmon,
Yeah.
when their fry emerge from the gravel, they basically bolt almost immediately for the ocean.
They just ride the river straight out to the estuary.
Exactly. But the sockeye takes a completely different evolutionary path. They spend anywhere from 1 to 3 years living in that freshwater lake, just feeding heavily.
Wait, so when they're gorging in this lake, what does that actually look like? I know the term is zooplankton, but are we talking microscopic specks here? Or like tiny shrimp?
Well, zooplankton encompasses a lot of small organisms, but for juvenile sockeye, we are primarily talking about tiny crustaceans like copepods and cladocerans.
Like Gaffnia.
Yes, things like Daphnia, which are often called water fleas. They're incredibly small, drifting animals. To a fry that's barely an inch long, a lake teeming with copepods is an all-you-can-eat buffet.
But it's a dangerous buffet, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The lake is a crucible. These fry are constantly hunted by larger predatory fish. You've got rainbow trout, lake trout, northern pike, depending on the specific ecosystem.
Which means they have to utilize the physical structure of the lake to survive. I mean, they don't just swim around randomly.
Exactly. They practice what is called diel vertical migration.
What does that mean for the fish on a daily basis?
During the day, when light penetrates the water and makes them highly visible to predators, they retreat to the deep, dark, cold layers of the lake.
To hide.
Right. Then, at night, under the cover of darkness, they migrate up to the surface layers where the zooplankton are concentrated so they can feed.
Wow, so it's a daily, exhausting commute driven by the need to eat without being eaten.
A very stressful commute, yeah.
But the evolutionary advantage of this lake nursery phase is profound, though. By staying in the lake for 1 to 3 years, the sockeye can really pack on mass.
Right. They grow larger and stronger in a relatively stable freshwater environment before they ever have to face the extreme rigors of the open ocean.
It's a calculated biological strategy.
And it showcases their phenotypic plasticity. They are literally tuning their biology to the specific chemistry, the specific temperature gradients, and the specific food webs of that one single body of water.
They're absorbing the chemical signature of that lake into their very tissues.
Which is going to become critical later on.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that.
Yeah.
But a lake, no matter how nutrient-rich, cannot sustain a sockeye forever. The lake provides an incredible nursery, but it simply doesn't have the sheer caloric density required to build the massive, powerful adult body that a salmon needs to reproduce.
No, not at all.
To pack on 10 pounds of muscle, the sockeye has to go to where the real food is. It has to head to the ocean.
And this transition from the freshwater lake to the marine environment is one of the most remarkable physiological feats in biology. The overarching term for this life strategy is anadromy.
Anadromy. So born in freshwater, migrate to the ocean to feed and grow, and then return to freshwater to reproduce. Now, here's where I always get tripped up by the logic of anadromy. If you take a freshwater fish from, say, your home aquarium, and you drop it in the ocean, the salt water will literally draw all the moisture out of its body through osmosis.
Yeah, it dehydrates and dies.
Right. The chemistry of a freshwater animal moving into salt water is fundamentally lethal.
It is entirely lethal unless the animal undergoes a complete cellular overhaul. Let's break it down. A freshwater fish is hyperosmotic to its environment, meaning it's saltier than the water around it.
Okay.
So water is constantly flooding into its body, and its kidneys have to constantly work to excrete that excess water in the form of dilute urine, all while specialized cells in its gills actively pump trace salts in from the fresh water.
So they were constantly bailing water out of the boat, essentially.
Yes. Now, a saltwater fish is hypoosmotic to its environment. It's less salty than the ocean, so it has the exact opposite problem.
The ocean is constantly sucking water out of the fish.
Exactly. To avoid dehydrating, a marine fish has to drink copious amounts of seawater, and then its body has to actively pump the excess salt back out into the ocean.
So how on earth does the sockeye flip that switch without dying when it hits the estuary? I mean, how does it rebuild itself?
It initiates a process called smoltification. In the spring of its migration year, triggered by changes in the photoperiod, the lengthening of the daylight hours, and warming water temperatures, the juvenile sockeye experiences a massive surge of hormones,
What kind of hormones?
primarily cortisol and growth hormones. These hormones trigger a total rewiring of its osmoregulatory system.
Wait, cortisol? Like the human stress hormone?
The very same. In salmon, this cortisol surge prepares the tissues for the shock of seawater. The gills are the main site of this transformation.
What happens to the gills?
In freshwater, specialized cells in the gills called chloride cells are configured to pull sodium and chloride ions inward. But during smoltification, these chloride cells undergo apoptosis. They die off.
Just die off completely.
Yep, and they're replaced by newly generated chloride cells that are rich in an enzyme called Nes plus K plus ATPase.
Okay, that's a mouthful. What does that enzyme do?
This new configuration completely reverses the polarity of the gill pumps. Instead of pulling salt in, they begin actively secreting salt out.
It's like completely rebuilding a car's engine while you're actively driving it down the highway at 70 miles an hour.
That's a great way to think about it.
I mean, you're tearing out the fuel injection and replacing the pistons while the car is still moving. You're entirely restructuring your kidneys and gills while riding a river current toward a lethal environment.
And the physiological changes are accompanied by morphological ones, too.
How do they look different?
In the lake, the fry had vertical stripes called par marks that helped camouflage them among the reeds and rocks. As they become smolts, they lose those marks. Purines accumulate in their scales, turning them a bright reflective silver on the sides and a dark blue or green on the back.
Which is classic countershading for the open ocean, right?
Exactly.
Because if a predator looks down from above, the dark back blends with the deep water. But if a predator looks up from below, the silver belly blends with the sunlight hitting the surface.
Exactly. They are preparing for a completely different visual environment, and they have to get it right, because once they hit the estuary and swim out into the salt, there's no turning back.
They enter the ocean phase of their life, riding that massive counterclockwise current known as the Alaska Gyre in the North Pacific.
The Big Blue Wilderness, and this is where they do the vast majority of their growing.
What are they eating out there?
They transition from eating microscopic copepods to hunting squid, krill, pteropods, and smaller fish. They transform from those tiny smolts into sleek, powerful predators.
They get huge, right?
Yeah, they'll grow to be anywhere from 18 to 31 inches long, packing on 4 to 15 pounds of muscle and fat.
But here is the profound challenge for fisheries biologists. When those millions of smolts hit the salt water of the North Pacific, they effectively just disappear.
They do. NOAA Fisheries frequently refers to the open ocean as a black box for salmon science.
Because it's just totally opaque to us. We can't exactly set up cameras in the middle of the Alaska Gyre.
We can't. This raises an important question. How do we track them? And the mortality rate inside that black box is staggering. NOAA's data suggests that out of every 100 sockeye smolts that leave the river and enter the ocean, roughly 99 of them will vanish.
Wow.
They never return.
A 99% death rate. Let's just pause on that for a second. We think of salmon runs as these massive abundance events, but what we're seeing is basically a rounding error of survival.
That's entirely accurate.
Imagine trying to track a moving object the size of your arm, swimming across millions of square miles of dark, turbulent, freezing water in the North Pacific. They're navigating a gauntlet of predators, right? Salmon sharks, harbor seals, orcas, larger pelagic fish.
And it isn't just predators either. It's the shifting dynamics of the ocean itself. Marine heat waves, like the infamous blob that formed in the Pacific, can completely disrupt the food web.
How does temperature affect the food?
Well, if the ocean temperature rises just a few degrees, the lipid-rich zooplankton that the salmon rely on are replaced by smaller, less nutritious warm water species. The salmon might still be eating, but they're essentially consuming junk food.
Which doesn't give them the energy reserves they need to survive the winter or make the journey back.
Exactly. Which perfectly illustrates why scientists struggle so immensely to quantify sockeye survival rates or forecast runs.
Right. Because if a run of salmon suddenly booms and we get record numbers, or if a run inexplicably crashes and very few return, the specific mechanics of why that happened are just locked inside that black box.
Was it a shift in the Pacific Decadal Oscillation? Was there a localized boom in salmon sharks? Did a specific layer of krill collapse?
We just don't know.
Yeah.
The primary theater of their life, where 99% of the population dynamics are decided, is largely hidden from us. We're often just left analyzing the survivors to guess what happened to the dead.
Yes. But despite that vastness, despite the 99% mortality rate, the survivors, that crucial 1%, they must eventually find their way back.
And not just back to the coast of North America, which is crazy enough. They have to find their way back to the exact single stream and sometimes the exact gravel bed where they were born years earlier.
This is the homing miracle. It's one of the most intensely studied phenomena in animal behavior. How does a fish, lost in the middle of a featureless Pacific Ocean, find a single gravel bed hundreds of miles inland?
I hear about this, and my immediate reaction is just skepticism. I mean, the ocean is turbulent, it's massive, and currents are constantly pushing you off course. How can a tiny fish possibly navigate that with pinpoint accuracy?
Well, the science breaks down into two distinct sequential phases of navigation. The first is the broad map, getting from the deep ocean back to the correct general coastline.
Okay, how do they do that?
The leading, heavily researched explanation for this is geomagnetic imprinting.
Geomagnetic imprinting. So they're using the Earth's magnetic field, but how are they literally feeling it?
It appears so. Biologists like Kenneth Lohman, who initially did groundbreaking work on sea turtles, and Nathan Putman have demonstrated that young salmon actually imprint on the magnetic field of their home area before they leave for the ocean.
But isn't the Earth's magnetic field just, like, everywhere?
It is, but it's not uniform. It varies depending on your geographic location. There are subtle, predictable differences in the magnetic intensity, how strong the field is, and the inclination, which is the angle at which the magnetic field lines intersect the surface of the Earth.
Ah, so the inclination and intensity basically form an invisible grid over the surface of the planet.
Exactly. It provides an X and Y coordinate system, and research indicates that salmon have microscopic crystals of magnetite.
Like the mineral.
Yes, a highly magnetic iron mineral embedded in their tissues, likely near their olfactory rosette or in their lateral line system. These crystals respond to the Earth's magnetic field, sending neurological signals directly to the brain.
That's wild.
So as young fish, they memorize the specific magnetic coordinates of the mouth of their home river. Then, years later, out in the open ocean, they use this inherited internal magnetic chart to navigate.
So they sense the current magnetic field, compare it to the imprinted memory of their home, and steer themselves across thousands of miles of open water until the magnetic signatures match.
That's the theory, yes.
But if you're listening to this and wondering how we actually know they use magnetic fields and aren't just following ocean currents or temperature gradients, you're not alone. The ocean is full of variables. How did scientists actually isolate the magnetic field as the primary driver?
The definitive proof came from analyzing decades of fisheries data, specifically looking at sockeye returning to the Fraser River in British Columbia.
Okay, what's special about the Fraser River?
Well, Putman and his colleagues looked at a very specific geographic hurdle. To get to the Fraser River from the open ocean, the returning salmon have to navigate around Vancouver Island. It's a massive landmass blocking the river mouth.
So they have to go around it.
Right. The salmon can either take a northern route around the island through the Johnstone Strait or a southern route through the Juan de Fuca Strait.
It's a fork in the road on a massive geographical scale.
Right. Now, the Earth's magnetic field is not static. It subtly shifts and drifts over decades. The researchers mapped the shifting magnetic field of the region over a 50-year period and compared it to the exact routes the salmon chose each year.
And what did they find?
They found that the route the salmon chose correlated almost perfectly with the shifting magnetic fields. When the magnetic signature that matched the Fraser River drifted northward, the salmon took the northern route. When it drifted southward, they took the southern route.
That is just brilliant science. mining 50 years of historical catch data to prove a neurobiological mechanism. So the fish were clearly prioritizing the magnetic map over other environmental cues.
Yep.
Okay, so the magnetic map gets them from the deep ocean back to the correct coastline. They hit the coast of British Columbia or Alaska. But the coast is massive. The magnetic grid isn't precise enough to guide them to a specific tributary of a specific lake. So how do they pinpoint the exact river?
That's where the second navigational system takes over. Once they're near the coast and entering the estuaries, olfaction, their sense of smell, becomes the primary guide.
Smell. Underwater.
Yes. NOAA research has firmly established that juvenile salmon imprint on the incredibly specific chemical odors associated with their natal stream during that smoltification phase we talked about earlier.
And when we talk about smell underwater, we have to be
Yeah.
precise. We aren't talking about smelling a pine tree on the bank. We're talking about dissolved chemistry.
We are talking about a highly complex, unique chemical fingerprint. Every stream has a distinct blend of dissolved amino acids, minerals, decaying plant matter, and even the bile salts of other salmon that previously spawned there.
So it's very specific.
Oh, incredibly specific. The juvenile sockeye memorizes this exact chemical cocktail.
So it's like using a GPS to get to the right city with magnetism, and then rolling down your windows to smell the local bakery to find the exact street. They're just following a chemical thread through a labyrinth.
That is the perfect analogy. Their olfactory rosette, the organ they use to smell, is unbelievably sensitive. They can detect a single drop of their home water diluted in millions of gallons of ocean water.
That's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. As they swim up the main stem of a large river system, they eventually come to a fork. They pull water into their nares, smelling the chemistry coming from the left tributary, and they smell the chemistry coming from the right.
And then what?
The specific amino acids bind to receptors in their olfactory rosette, triggering a memory match. They choose the branch that smells exactly like home. They repeat this process at every single junction, swimming upstream for hundreds of miles, until they are hovering over the exact gravel bed where they hatched.
It's just a layered navigation system. The geomagnetic compass gets them to the right continent, and then the olfactory memory guides them through the labyrinth of the freshwater watershed.
It's a remarkable evolutionary adaptation, but as with all biology, it is important to note that this system isn't 100% flawless. There's a margin of error. Not every single fish makes it back to its exact birthplace.
And biologists call this straying, right? When a fish ends up in a non-natal stream, a stream it wasn't born in.
Yes, straying. And understanding straying requires us to look at the ecology of salmon from a much broader perspective. On an individual level, a fish that gets lost and spawns in the wrong stream seems like a failure of the navigation system.
Right, like they just messed up.
But on a population level, a certain amount of natural straying is absolutely essential for the survival of the species as a whole.
Why is getting lost essential?
Because of the geologic volatility of their environment. Think about the Pacific Northwest and Alaska over thousands of years. It's an incredibly dynamic landscape.
Oh, sure. Earthquakes, volcanoes.
Exactly. Rivers are routinely blocked by massive landslides. Glaciers advance and wipe out entire watersheds and then retreat to reveal barren, newly formed rivers. Volcanic eruptions, like Mount St. Helens, can instantly choke a river system with ash, wiping out an entire run of salmon in a single day.
Right, so if salmon had absolute 100% perfect homing fidelity and their home stream was destroyed by a landslide, that entire distinct genetic line would just go extinct instantly. They would just bash their heads against the landslide until they died.
Exactly. Natural straying is the biological mechanism by which salmon colonize new habitats and rebuild populations after natural disasters.
That makes total sense.
When a glacier retreats and a new stream is formed, it has no native salmon. It's the strays, the pioneers whose navigation systems were just loose enough to let them explore a new scent, who colonize that new stream and establish a new run. Straying is basically an evolutionary backup plan against localized extinction.
You need a baseline level of exploration mixed in with the fidelity.
Precisely. However, straying is also an active area of intense scientific study today, particularly concerning the interaction between wild salmon and hatchery-raised salmon.
How so?
NOAA and various state agencies monitor this dynamic very closely. Research indicates that salmon raised in artificial hatcheries often exhibit higher rates of straying than wild fish.
Is that because their imprinting window was disrupted in the hatchery? Like they didn't get the natural exposure to the specific water chemistry during the critical smoltification period?
That is the leading hypothesis, yes. Or they were transported in trucks around dams before being released, bypassing the natural factory mapping process entirely.
Oh, right.
Fisheries biologists track this because if a large number of hatchery strays wander into pristine wild spawning grounds, they can introduce domesticated genetics that are less adapted to that specific river, and they compete for limited spawning gravel and resources.
It's a highly complex ecological dynamic, balancing the need for natural straying with the integrity of locally adapted wild stocks. It just highlights how exquisitely calibrated the natural life cycle is. But let's bring the focus back to our specific wild sockeye. The ones that navigated the magnetic grid perfectly, sniffed out the right chemical thread, and are now entering the fresh water of their home river.
They've survived the 99% mortality rate of the black box.
But this transition back into fresh water triggers the most dramatic and final physical transformation of their entire lives.
We are entering the climax of the life cycle.
Before we detail exactly what happens to the sockeye as it swims upstream, I think it's helpful to establish exactly who is in the river with them. The sockeye is part of a famous family of Pacific salmon, all belonging to the genus Oncorhynchus.
Yes. There are 5 main species found in North American waters. Let's run through them quickly because each has a distinct life strategy.
Let's do it.
Okay, there is the chum salmon, often called the dog salmon, known for developing these vivid, vertical calico bands of purple and green down their sides when they spawn. There is the chinook, or king salmon, which is the giant of the family. A chinook can stay out at sea for up to 6 years and return weighing over 100 pounds.
Huge. Then you have the coho, or silver salmon, which are incredibly acrobatic and develop this beautiful maroon flush on their sides.
Right. And you have the pink salmon, the smallest of the family, which have a very rigid 2-year life cycle, and the males grow this massive, exaggerated hump on their backs.
And of course, you have our protagonists, the sockeye, the lake specialist.
Those are the 5 Pacific siblings. But to fully appreciate the dramatic finality of what the sockeye is about to do, we actually have to mention a distant cousin for contrast.
The Atlantic salmon, Salmon Counting.
Right. The Atlantic salmon is entirely different. It isn't even in the same genus as the Pacific salmon. And the crucial biological difference is that the Atlantic salmon breaks the grimmest rule of the Pacific family. The Pacific salmon, with almost no exceptions, are semiparous.
Semiparous. So from the Latin semel, meaning once, and pario, meaning to beget, they spawn once and they die.
Exactly. It's a fatal reproductive strategy. But the Atlantic salmon is iteroperous. Like many other fish, it is capable of surviving the grueling process of swimming upriver and spawning.
And then what?
It can then return to the ocean as what's called a kelt, heal its wounds, regain its body weight, and come back to spawn again in future years.
Which is an incredible survival strategy, though obviously they have had a very difficult history navigating the modern world.
They have. Historical data from NOAA shows that before the widespread industrialization and construction of impassable mill dams in the 1830s, hundreds of thousands of Atlantic salmon returned to U.S. rivers in New England every year.
And now?
Today, those adult returns are a fraction of a percent of historical levels, and populations like the one in the Gulf of Maine are federally listed as endangered. The dams physically prevented them from completing that iteroperous life cycle.
It's a sobering historical reality. But returning to our Pacific sockeye, who does not have the option of iteroparity, the semiparous sockeye gets one single shot at reproduction. They hit the fresh water of their home river, and their body literally begins to dismantle itself.
It is arguably one of the most stunning morphological transformations in the animal kingdom. Remember, out in the ocean, they were sleek, silver, and dark blue, built for speed and camouflage.
Right.
But the moment they hit the fresh water and begin the agonizing journey upriver, they stop eating completely. Completely. Their digestive tracts literally atrophy and shrink down to almost nothing to make maximum room in their body cavities for developing eggs and milt.
Milt being the seminal fluid of the males.
Yes, they are surviving entirely on the fat and muscle reserves they built up in the ocean, and their exterior color changes drastically.
Oh, so?
Well, in the ocean, they consumed huge amounts of zooplankton and krill, which are rich in carotenoid pigments, specifically one called astaxanthin.
Wait, astaxanthin? That's the same pigment that makes flamingos pink, right?
Hey, exactly. In the ocean, the salmon store this astaxanthin in their muscle tissue, which is why raw salmon meat is orange or red. But as they swim upriver to spawn, they begin to resorb their silver scales into their skin, and they mobilize that astaxanthin pigment out of their flesh and drive it directly into their skin.
Whoa.
Their bodies turn a brilliant, blazing, unmistakable blood red.
And their heads turn olive green. It is an astonishing contrast. The males also undergo profound skeletal changes too, don't they?
They do.
They grow humped backs, and their snouts extend, hook, and warp into these sharp, fearsome shapes called a kype, complete with enlarged dog-like teeth.
The kype is entirely driven by sexual selection. The males use these hooked jaws and teeth to viciously fight other males for dominance over the reds and access to the females.
So they're literally rebuilding their skeletons into weaponry, using nothing but stored oceanic fat while actively starving to death.
That's exactly what they're doing.
And that blazing red body, I mean, it isn't for camouflage anymore.
No, it's the exact opposite of countershading. The red body is a biological billboard. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a visual signal to other salmon in the shallow, clear water of the spawning grounds that they are fully mature and ready to reproduce.
They've entirely abandoned any strategy for survival.
Yes. They are pouring every last ounce of cellular energy into this one final act. They find the exact gravel bed, the females dig the reds, the males fight and fertilize, and then, within days or weeks of spawning, their immune systems collapse, their bodies shut down, and they die right there in the stream.
When you really zoom out and look at this life cycle from an ecological perspective, you realize that this massive one-way trip is actually the engine of the entire ecosystem.
It really is.
The salmon are taking all that incredibly dense, rich energy they gathered across millions of square miles of the ocean, the marine nitrogen, the phosphorus, the lipids, and they are transporting it hundreds of miles inland. They are a river of ocean nutrients flowing physically uphill into the mountains.
It's a massive conveyor belt of biomass. Biologists refer to these as marine-derived nutrients, or MDN. When those millions of sockeye die in the rivers and lakes, their decomposing bodies feed absolutely everything.
They're like the bears.
Brown bears gorge on the fatty brains and row to pack on enough weight to survive winter hibernation. Bald eagles and gulls scavenge the carcasses.
But it goes beyond just feeding animals.
Far beyond. The bears drag the carcasses into the woods where insects break them down. The nutrients leach deep into the soil. Biologists have actually tracked specific isotopes of nitrogen, nitrogen-15, which is heavily concentrated in the marine environment, and found it deep in the wood of towering Sitka spruce and Douglas fir trees growing miles away from the coastline.
That's amazing.
The trees are literally built out of dead salmon. The salmon are feeding the forest itself, which in turn shades the river, keeping the water cold enough for the next generation of eggs to survive.
It's an unbelievably tight reciprocal loop, the complete forfeiture of the individual for the sake of the ecosystem. But this awe-inspiring biology brings us right back to the most practical, urgent, and frankly terrifying question for the people tasked with managing this species.
Right.
Because if this entire life happens out of sight, hidden as an egg under the gravel, swimming deep in a lake, lost for years in the 99% mortality black box of the ocean, and only returning for a brief, frantic, fatal climax, how on earth could anyone ever accurately count them?
Exactly. How do you ensure that modern humanity, with our massive commercial fleets and our insatiable appetite for seafood, doesn't just fish them into oblivion?
Right. If the whole returning run is scattered across weeks, mixed up with other species in the ocean, and entirely uncountable till the very end, how do you set a quota?
The short answer is, you can't. Fisheries managers realized very early on in the 20th century that attempting to predict or count the entire run of salmon while they were still in the ocean was a fool's errand.
So what do?
They had to invent a completely different paradigm for resource management. They created the concept of escapement.
Escapement. It is such a fascinating, slightly counterintuitive word.
It is the bedrock philosophy of modern sustainable salmon management. Escapement literally refers to the number of fish that escape everything. They escape the commercial fishing nets in the bay, they escape the sport fishermen in the lower river, they escape the bears and seals, and they make it all the way up the river to physically reach the gravel and spawn.
It is a profound philosophical inversion of how we usually handle natural resources. We usually manage based on what we extract, how many trees we cut, how many barrels of oil we pump. Escapement means we are managing strictly based on what we leave behind.
Yes.
It's like only being allowed to count the people who successfully make it out of a complex maze, and then having to use that final number of survivors to reverse engineer how many people are still inside the maze and whether you can safely let anyone else into the maze.
That is precisely the mathematical and political pressure that fisheries managers are under every single summer. Because biologists study these rivers and set what are called escapement goals.
How do they determine those goals?
Based on the size of the lake and the square footage of viable spawning gravel, they calculate the exact biological minimum number of spawning salmon needed to ensure that the river is fully seeded to produce the next generation.
So if the goal is 1 million fish, and you only count 800,000 escaping,
Then the fishery is shut down. If you let too few fish escape the nets, the population doesn't replace itself, the future runs collapse, and the entire ecosystem starves.
but crucially there is pressure on the other side too.
Yes, if you let too many fish escape.
You've left harvestable fish in the water.
Exactly. You have essentially wasted a renewable economic resource. You're leaving millions of dollars, vast amounts of human food supply, and the livelihoods of multi-generational fishing families entirely on the table. The economic stakes of hitting that escapement goal exactly right are astronomical.
To understand the sheer scale of those stakes, we have to look at Bristol Bay, Alaska, because it is the undisputed epicenter of sockeye salmon management.
Bristol Bay is a massive watershed feeding into the Bering Sea, and it hosts the world's largest wild sockeye salmon runs. The rivers there, the Kiftachak, the Naknek, the Nushagak, the Ejegik, draw tens of millions of returning sockeye every single summer, over a period of just a few frantic weeks.
Just massive numbers.
To give you context on the sheer volume, in the record-breaking season of 2022, the commercial harvest in Bristol Bay alone hit 60.1 million fish.
60 million fish harvested in one region in the span of about a month. The logistics of processing that much protein are mind-boggling.
And every single one of those nets that goes into the water, every commercial fishing opener, is dictated in real time by the escapement counts happening upriver. Managers are aggressively watching the numbers of fish moving past specific choke points in the rivers.
Because you can't count them in the ocean.
Right. Humans have to build these physical or technological choke points to force the invisible fish to become visible.
What do these choke points actually look like? Are we just standing on the bank with binoculars?
Sometimes, yes. On smaller rivers, they build physical weirs, essentially fences across the river with a small gate. As the fish funnel through the gate, a technician sits there with a hand clicker, literally tallying the fish one by one as they pass over a white flashboard.
That's so tedious.
It is. On larger, murkier rivers where you can't see the bottom, they use high-tech sonar arrays, like DIDSON or ARIS systems, which beam high-frequency sound waves across the river column. Technicians stare at screens, counting the acoustic shadows of fish swimming upstream in the dark.
And what about clear rivers?
On clear rivers like the Cridchock, they build counting towers on the banks where people stand above the water, staring through polarized glasses, counting the pulses of fish pushing against the current.
It is humanity's incredibly rough, profoundly humble answer to the salmon's cryptic nature. We can't see them in the abyss of the ocean. We can't see them buried under the gravel. So we build a scaffolding tower on the edge of a freezing river, stare intensely at the water for 10 hours a day, and count the survivors as they race toward their own death.
It's quite the image.
And the immense, crushing pressure on the state biologists making these counts is just staggering. A missed count, a broken sonar, or a bad estimate can mean immediate financial ruin for a fleet of boats, or catastrophic ecological failure for a run that took thousands of years to adapt to that specific river.
It's a profound responsibility. You are attempting to quantify and manage an absolute biological miracle using math, sonar, and hand clickers.
It really is. Okay, I want to step back and just look at the totality of the journey we've mapped out today. We started with a single fertilized egg, buried deep in the dark, hypoxic gravel. We watched it hatch into an elevin, surviving a freezing winter on a yolk sac. We saw it emerge as a fry into a vast lake, undergoing phenotypic plasticity, tuning its cellular biology to the specific chemistry of that one body of water while dodging lake trout in the dark.
And then the smoltification.
Right. The physiological marvel of smoltification in anadromy, completely rebuilding its gills, reversing its chloride cells, and surviving a lethal transition into saltwater. We sent it out into the massive, terrifying black box of the North Pacific, navigating marine heat waves and apex predators, where 99% of its peers simply vanished.
And then, against all odds, it finds its way back.
Guided by the inherited magnetic grid of the Earth and the unique chemical amino acid signature of its childhood stream, it navigated thousands of miles back home. It absorbed its scales, mobilized its astaxanthin, transformed into a brilliant red banner, fought for dominance, spawned to create the next generation, and died, depositing marine nitrogen into the roots of the forest. It is a life cycle that borders on the mythical.
It really is. It is one of the most perfectly calibrated loops in the natural world. But as we close today, there is one final provocative reality about this loop that I want you to consider.
Oh, what's that?
We've spent a lot of time talking about how that returning 1% of salmon brings a river of nutrients uphill to feed the forest. The bears, the eagles, the spruce trees. But consider the 99% that we talked about earlier. The millions upon millions of salmon that vanish into the black box of the open ocean and never return to the rivers.
The ones that don't make the escapement cut. The ones that just die out there.
Exactly. The sheer mathematics of that 99% mortality rate means that the vast, overwhelming majority of all salmon biomass created on this earth never comes back to the rivers.
Where does it go?
Instead, those millions of tons of salmon, the ones that are eaten by predators, the ones that succumb to disease or starvation, they're falling downward. They act as a massive, invisible, continuous snow of biological nutrients sinking miles down into the black water of the Pacific, eventually settling on the abyssal plain.
Wow. I had never thought about it like that.
They are feeding the mysterious, largely unexplored benthic ecosystems of the deep ocean. Deep-sea scavengers, crabs, isopods, and entire microbial communities are sustained by these salmon falls. Even in their disappearance, even when they fail to complete the miraculous journey home, they are holding the world together. They are fueling life in the deepest, darkest, most alien places on Earth.
What an incredible thought to end on. That invisible snow of nutrients sustaining the deep sea. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden life of the sockeye salmon. It is a potent reminder that the world is so much more complex and so much more wondrous than what we can easily observe from the surface. Keep questioning, keep looking beneath the surface, and we will see you next time.